The Story of King Arthur and His Knights by Howard Pyle. Chapter 4th. How Queen Guinevere quarrelled with Sir Gawain, and how Sir Gawain left the court of King Arthur for a while. Now in the same measure that Queen Guinevere felt high regard for Sir Pelleas, in that same degree she felt misliking for Sir Gawain. For though Sir Gawain was said of many to have a silver tongue, and whilst he could upon occasion talk in such a manner as to beguile others unto his will, yet he was of a proud temper and very stern and haughty. Wherefore he would always not brook that the Lady Guinevere should command him unto her will as she did the other knights of the court. Moreover, she could not ever forget how Sir Gawain did deny her that one time at Camelot, when she besought him and his companions for aid, in her time of trouble, nor how discourteous his speech had been to her upon that occasion. So there was no great liking between these two proud souls, for Queen Guinevere had held to her way, and Sir Gawain had held to his way under all circumstances. Now it happened upon an occasion that Sir Gawain, Sir Griflet, and Sir Constantine of Cornwall sat talking with 5 ladies of the Queen's court in a pleached garden that lay beneath the tower of the Lady Guinevere, and that they made very pleasant discourse together. For some whiles they would talk and make them merry with jests and taunts, and other whiles one or another would take a lute that they had with them, and would play upon it and would sing. Now, while these lords and ladies sat thus enjoying pleasant discourse and singing in that manner, Queen Guinevere sat at a window that overlooked the garden, and which was not very high from the ground, wherefore she could overhear all that they said. But these lords and ladies were altogether unaware that the Queen could overhear them, so they talked and laughed very freely, and the Queen greatly enjoyed their discourse and the music that they made. That day was extraordinarily balmy, and it being well towards the sloping of the afternoon, those lords and ladies were clad in a very gay attire, and of all who were there Sir Gawain was the most gaily clad, for he was dressed in a sky-blue silk embroidered with threads of silver. And Sir Gawain was playing upon the lute and singing a ballad in an exceedingly pleasing voice, so that Queen Guinevere, as she sat at the window beside the open casement, was very well content for to listen to him. Now, there was a certain greyhound of which Queen Guinevere was wonderfully fond, so much so that she had adorned its neck with a collar of gold inset with carbuncles. At that moment the hound came running into that garden, and his feet were wet and soiled with earth. So, hearing Sir Gawain singing and playing upon the lute, that hound ran unto him and leaped upon him. At this Sir Gawain was very wroth, wherefore he clenched his hand and smote the hound upon the head with the knuckles thereof, so that the hound lifted up his voice with great outcry. But when Queen Guinevere beheld the blow, she was greatly offended, wherefore she called out from a window, "Why dost thou smite my dog, Sir?" And the lords and ladies who were below in the garden were very much surprised, and were greatly abashed to find that the Queen was so nigh unto them as to overhear all that they said and to behold all that they did. But Sir Gawain spoke up very boldly, saying, "The dog affronted me, my lady, and whosoever affronteth me, him I strike." Then Queen Guinevere grew very angry with Sir Gawain, wherefore she said, "Thy speech is overboard, Sir." And Sir Gawain said, "Not overboard, lady, but only bold enough for to maintain my rights." At this speech the Lady Guinevere's face flamed like fire, and her eyes shone very bright, and she said, "I am sure that thou dost forget unto whom thou speakest, Sir Knight." At the which Sir Gawain smiled very bitterly, and said, "And thou, lady, dost not remember that I am the son of a king, so powerful that he needs no help from any other king for to maintain his rights?" At these words all those who were there fell silent as though they were turned to stones, for that speech was exceedingly bold and haughty. Wherefore all looked upon the ground, for they durst not look either upon Queen Guinevere nor upon Sir Gawain. And the Lady Guinevere also was silent for a long time, endeavouring to recover herself from that speech, and when she spake it was as though she was half smothered by her anger. And she said, "Sir Knight, thou art proud and arrogant beyond measure, for never did I hear of anyone who dared to give reply unto his queen as thou hast spoken unto me. But this is my court, and I may command in it as I choose. Wherefore I do now bid thee for to be gone, and to show thy face no more, either here nor in the hall nor any places where I hold my court, for thou art an offence to me. Wherefore in none of these places shalt thou have leave to show thy face, until thou dost ask my pardon for the affront which thou hast put upon me." Then Sir Gawain arose and bowed very low to the Queen Guinevere, and he said, "Lady, I go, nor will I return thitherward, until thou art willing for to tell me that thou art sorry for the discourteous way in which thou hast entreated me now, and at other times before my peers." So saying, Sir Gawain took his leave from that place, nor did he turn his head to look behind him. And Queen Guinevere went into her chamber and wept in secret for anger and for shame. For indeed she was greatly grieved at what had befallen, yet she was so proud that in no wise have recalled the words that she had spoken, even had she been able to have done so. Now, when the news of that quarrel had gone about the castle, it came unto the ears of Sir Owain. Wherefore Sir Owain went straightway unto Sir Gawain, and asked him what was ado. And Sir Gawain, who was like one distraught and in great despair, told him everything. Then Sir Owain said, "Thou wert certainly in the wrong for to speak unto the queen as thou didst. Nevertheless, if thou art banished from the court, I will go with thee, for thou art my cousin German and my companion, and my heart cleaveth unto thee." So Sir Owain went unto King Arthur, and he said, "Lord, my cousin Sir Gawain hath been banished from this court by the queen. Although I may not say that he hath not deserved that punishment, I would fain crave thy leave for to go along with him." At this King Arthur was very grieved, but he maintained a steadfast countenance, and said, "Messire, I will not stay thee from going where it pleases thee. As for thy kinsman, I dare say he gave the queen such a great offence that she could not do otherwise than as she did." So both Owain and Sir Gawain went on to their inns and commanded their esquires for to arm them. Then they, with their esquires, went forth from Camelot, betaking their way toward the forest lands. There these two knights and their esquires travelled for all day until the grey of the eventide, what time the birds were singing their last songs ere closing their eyes for the night. So, finding the evening drawing on apace, those knights were afraid that they would not be able to find kindly lodging ere the night should descend upon them. And they talked together a great deal concerning the thing. But as they came to the top of a certain hill, they beheld below them a valley, very fair and well tilled, with many cottages and farm crofts. And in the midst of that valley was a very goodly abbey, very fair to look upon. Wherefore Sir Gawain said unto Sir Owain, "If yonder abbey is an abbey of monks, I believe we shall find excellent lodging there for tonight." And so they rode down into that valley and to the abbey. And they found a porter at the wicket, of whom they learned that it was indeed an abbey of monks. Wherefore they were very glad and made rejoicing. But when the abbot of that abbey learned who they were, and what quality and high estate, he was exceedingly pleased for to welcome them. Wherefore he brought them into that part of the abbey where he himself dwelt. There he bade them welcome, and had set before them a good supper, whereat they were very much rejoiced. Now the abbot was merry of soul, and took great pleasure in discourse with strangers, so he diligently inquired of those two knights concerning the reason why they were errant. But they told him not concerning that quarrel at court, but only that they were in search of adventure. Upon this the abbot said, "Ha, messieurs, if ye are in search of adventures, ye may find one not very far from this place." So Gawain said, "What adventure is that?" And the abbot replied, "I will tell ye. If ye will travel to the eastward from this place, ye will come, after a while, into a spot where ye shall find a very fair castle of grey stone. In front of that castle you will find a good level meadow, and in the midst of that meadow a sycamore tree, and upon that sycamore tree a shield to which certain ladies offer affront in a very singular manner. If ye forbid these ladies to affront that shield, you will discover a very good adventure." Then Sir Gawain said, "That is a very strange matter. Now, tomorrow morning we will go to that place, and will endeavor to discover what sort that adventure may be." And the abbot said, "Do so," and laughed in great measure. So when the next morning had come, Sir Gawain and Sir Owain gave adieu unto the abbot, and took their leave of their place, riding away on to the eastward as the abbot had advised. And after they had ridden in that direction for 2 or 3 hours, or more, they beheld before them the borders of a forest all green and shady with foliage, and very cheerful in the warmth of the early summer day. And lo, immediately at the edge of the woodland stood a fair strong castle of grey stone, with windows of glass shining very brightly against the sky. Then Sir Gawain and Sir Owain beheld that everything was as the abbot had said, for in the front of the castle was a smooth level meadow with a sycamore tree in the midst thereof, and as they drew near they perceived that a sable shield hung in the branches of the trees, and in a little they could see that it bore the device of 3 white goshawks displayed. But the which was very extraordinary was in the front of the shield there stood several young damsels, exceedingly fair of face, and that the several damsels continually offered a great deal of insult to that shield. For some of these damsels smote it ever and anon with peeled rods of osier, and others flung lumps of clay upon it, so that the shield was greatly defaced therewith. Now nigh under the shield was a very noble-appearing knight, clad all in black armor, and seated upon a black war-horse, and it was very plain to see that the shield belonged unto that knight, for otherwise he had no shield. Yet that was very likely his shield, yet the knight offered no protest either by word or act to stay those damoiselles from offering affront thereunto. Then Sir Owain said unto Sir Gawain, Yonder is a very strange thing that I behold. Belike one of us is to encounter yonder knight. And Sir Gawain said, Maybe so. Then Sir Owain said, If it will be so, then I will undertake the adventure. Not so, said Sir Gawain, for I will undertake it myself, I being the elder of us twain, and the better seasoned in knighthood. So Owain said, Very well, let it be that way, for thou art very much more powerful a knight than I, and it would be a pity for one of us to fail in this undertaking. Thereupon Sir Gawain said, Let it be, then, and I will undertake it. So he set spurs to his horse and rode rapidly to where those damsels offered affront in that way to the sable shield. And he set his spear in rest and shouted in a loud voice, Get ye away! Get ye away! So when the damsels beheld that armed knight riding at them in that wise, they fled away shrieking from before him. Then the sable knight, who sat not a great distance away, rode forward in a very stately manner unto Sir Gawain, and he said, Sir knight, why dost thou interfere with those ladies? Whereunto Sir Gawain replied, Because they offer assault unto what appeared to me to be a noble and knightly shield. At this the sable knight spake very haughtily, saying, Sir knight, that shield belongeth unto me, and I do assure thee that I am very well able to take care of it without interference of any other defender. To which Sir Gawain said, It would appear not, Sir knight. Then the sable knight said, Messire, and thou thinkest thou art better able to take care of that shield than I? I think that thou wouldst do very well to make thy words good with thy body. To this Sir Gawain said, I will do mine endeavor to show thee that I am better to guard that shield than thou art who owns it. Upon this the sable knight, without further ado, rode on to the sycamore tree, and took down from thence the shield that hung there. And he dressed the shield upon his arm, and took his spear in hand, and made him ready for defence. And Sir Gawain likewise made him ready for defence. And then each knight took such station upon the field as appeared unto him to be fitting. Now when the people of that castle perceived that a combat of arms was toward, they crowded in great numbers to the walls, so that there was many as 20 ladies and esquires, and folk of different degrees, looking down upon the field of the battle from the walls. So when those knights were altogether prepared, Sir Owain gave the signal for encounter, and each knight shouted aloud and drave spurs into his charger, and rushed forward to the assault with a noise like thunder for loudness. Now Sir Gawain thought that he should easily overcome his adversary in this assault, and that he would be able to cast him down from out of his saddle without much pains, for there was hardly any knight in the realm equal to Sir Gawain for prowess. And indeed he had never yet been unhorsed in combat excepting by King Arthur. So when those two rode to the assault, the one against the other, Sir Gawain thought of his surety that his adversary would fall before him. But it was not so, for in that attack Sir Gawain's spear was broken into many pieces, but the spear of the sable knight held, so that Sir Gawain was cast with great violence out of the saddle, smiting the dust with a terrible noise of falling. And so astonished was he at that fall, that it appeared unto him not as though he fell from his saddle, but as though the earth rose up and smote him. Wherefore he lay for a while, all stunned with the blow and with the astonishment thereof. But when he had heard the shouts of the people upon the castle wall, he immediately aroused himself from where he lay in the dust, and he was so filled with rage and shame that he was like altogether intoxicated. Wherefore he drew his sword and rushed with great fury upon his enemy, with intent to hew him down by main strength. Then that other knight, seeing him come thus at him, immediately voided his own saddle, and drew his sword, and put himself in posture either for assault or for defence. So they lashed together, tracing this way and that, and smiting with such fury that the blows they gave were most terrible for to behold. But when Sir Owain beheld how fierce was that assault, he set spurs upon his horse, and pushed him between the knights contested, crying out loud, Sir knights, Sir knights, what is this? Here is no cause for such a desperate battle. But Sir Gawain cried out very furiously, Let it be! Let it be, and stand aside, for this quarrel concerns thee not. And the sable knight said, A horse or a foot, I am ready to meet that knight at any time. But Sir Owain said, Not so! Ye shall not fight no more in this quarrel. For shame, Gawain! For shame to seek such a desperate quarrel with a knight that did but meet thee in a friendly fashion in a fair contest. Then Sir Gawain was aware that Sir Owain was both just and right, wherefore he put up his sword in silence, albeit he was like to weep for vexation for the shame of his overthrow. And the Sable Knight put up his sword also, and so peace was made betwixt the two. Then the Sable Knight said, I am glad that this quarrel is ended, for I perceive, messieurs, that ye are assuredly knights of great nobility and gentleness of breeding. Wherefore, I would that we might henceforth be friends and companions instead of enemies. Wherefore, I do beseech thee for to come with me a little ways from here, where I have taken up my inn, so that we may rest and refresh ourselves in my pavilion. Unto this Sir Owain said, I grant thee gramercy for thy courtesy, said I, and we will go with thee with all the pleasure that is possible to feel. And Sir Gawain said, I am content. And so these three knights straightway left the field of battle. And when they had come to the edge of the forest, Sir Gawain and Sir Owain perceived a very fine pavilion of green silk set up beneath the tree. And about that pavilion were many attendants of divers sorts, and all clad in colours of green and white. So Sir Gawain perceived that the knight who had overthrown them was certainly someone of very high estate. Wherefore he was very greatly comforted. Then the esquires of those three knights came and removed the helmet, each esquire from his knight, so that the knight may be made comfortable thereby. And when this was done, Sir Gawain and Sir Owain perceived that the Sable Knight was very comely of countenance, being ruddy of face, and with hair like copper for redness. Then Sir Owain said unto the knight, Sir unknown knight, this knight, my companion, is Sir Gawain, son of King Urien of Gore, and I am Owain, the son of King Lot of Orkney. Now I crave of thee thou wilt make thyself known unto us in like manner. Ha, said the other, I am glad that ye are such very famous and royal knights, for I am also of royal blood, being Sir Marhaus, the son of the King of Ireland. Then Sir Gawain was very glad to discover how exalted was the quality of the knight who overthrew him, and he said unto Sir Marhaus, Messire, I make my vow that thou art one of the most terrible knights in the world, for thou hast done unto me this day what only one knight in all the world hath ever done, and that is King Arthur, who is my uncle and my lord. Thou must certainly come unto the court of King Arthur, for he will be wonderfully glad to see thee, and maybe he will make thee a knight of the Round Table, and there is no honor in all the world that can be so great as that. Thus he spoke unthinkingly, and he remembered. Wherefore he smote his fist into his forehead, crying out, Oh, who am I for to bid thee to come to the court of King Arthur, who as only yesterday was disgraced and banished therefrom? Then Sir Marhaus felt very sorry for Sir Gawain, and he inquired concerning the trouble that lay upon him. And Sir Owain told Sir Marhaus all about that quarrel, and that Sir Marhaus was still more sorry for Sir Gawain. Wherefore he said, Messieurs, I like ye both wonderfully well, and I would fain become your companion in the adventures ye are to undertake, for now I need remain here no longer. Ye must know that I was obliged to defend those ladies who assailed my shield, until I had overthrown several knights in their behalf. And I must tell ye that Sir Gawain was the seventh knight I have overthrown. Wherefore, since I have now overthrown him, I am now released from my obligation, and may go with thee. Then Sir Gawain and Sir Owain were very much astonished that any knight should lie beneath so strange an obligation as that, to defend those who assailed his shield, and they besought Marhaus to tell them why he should have been obliged to fulfill such a pledge. So Sir Marhaus said, I will tell ye. The case was this. Some whiles ago I was travelling in these parts with a hawk upon my wrist. At that time I was clad very lightly in holiday attire, to wit, I wore a tunic of green silk, and hosen of one of green and one of white, and I had nothing upon my way by way of defence but a light buckler and a short sword. Now, coming unto a certain stream of water, very deep and rapid, I perceived before me a bridge of stone crossing that stream, but so narrowly that only one horseman might cross the bridge at a time. So I entered upon that bridge, and was part way across it, when I perceived a knight in armour coming the other way. And behind that knight there sat upon a pillion a very fair lady with golden hair and very proud of demeanour. Now when that knight perceived me upon the bridge, he cried aloud, Get back! Get back, and suffer me to pass! But this I would not do, but said, Not so, Sir Knight, for having advanced so far upon this bridge, I scarce have the right of way to complete my passage, and it is for you to wait and to permit me to cross. But the knight would not do so, but immediately put himself in posture of offence, and straightway came against me upon that bridge, with intent either to slay me or to drive me back onto the other extremity of the bridge. But this he was not able to do, for I defended myself very well with my light weapons. So I pushed my horse against his horse, and I drove him backwards from off the bridge and into the water. Whereunto the horse and the knight and the lady, all of them fell into a terrible uproar. At this the lady shrieked in great measure, and both she and the knight were like to drown in the water, the knight being altogether clad in armor, so that he could not uplift himself above the flood. Wherefore, beholding their extremity, I leaped from off my horse and into the water, and with great ado, and with much danger unto myself, I was able to bring them both to the land. But that lady was very greatly offended with me, for her fair raiment was altogether wet and spoiled by water. Wherefore she upbraided me with great violence. So I kneeled down before her and besought her pardon with all humility. But she still continued to upbraid me. Then I offered unto her for to perform any penance that she might set upon me. At this the lady appeared to be greatly mollified, for she said, Very well, I will set thee a penance. And when her knight recovered, she said, Come with us. And so I mounted my horse and followed them. So, after they had gone a considerable distance, we came to this place, and here she commanded me as follows. Sir knight, quoth she, this castle belongeth unto me and unto the knight who is my lord. Now, this shall be the penance for the affront thou hast given me. Thou shalt take thy shield, and hang it up in yonder sycamore tree. And every day I will send certain damsels of mine own out from the castle, and they shall offend against that shield, and thou shalt not only suffer whatever offence they might offer, but thou shalt defend them against all comers until thou hast overcome 7 knights. So I have done until this morning, when thou, Sir Gawain, camest hither. And thou art the 7th knight against whom I have contended. And as I have overcome thee, my penance is now ended, and I am free. Then Sir Gawain and Sir Owain gave Marhaus great joy that his penance was completed, and they were very well satisfied, each party with the others. So Sir Gawain and Sir Owain abided there that night in the pavilion of Sir Marhaus, and the next morning they arose, and having laved themselves in a forest stream, they departed from that place where they were. So they entered the forest lands once more, and made their way by certain paths that they do not know whitherward. And they travelled all that morning, and until the afternoon was come. Now as they travelled thus, Sir Marhaus said of a sudden, Messieurs, know ye where we are come to? Nay, they said, we know not. Then Sir Marhaus said, This part of the forest is called Arroy, and is further called the Forest of Adventure. For it is very well known that when a knight, or a party of knights, enters this forest, they will assuredly meet with an adventure of some sort, from which some come forth with credit while others fail therein. And Sir Owain said, I am glad that we have come hither. Now let us go forward into this forest. So these 3 knights and their esquires continued on to the woodland, where was silence so deep that even the treads of the horses upon the earth was scarcely to be heard. And there was no note of bird, and no sound of voice, and hardly did any light penetrate into the gloom of that woodland. Wherefore those knights said unto one another, This is soothly a very strange place, and one, maybe, of enchantment. Now when they had come to the very midst of these dark woodlands, they perceived of a sudden in the pathway before them a fawn as white as milk, and round the neck of the fawn was a collar of pure gold. And the fawn stood and looked at them, and when they had come nigh to it, it turned and ran along a very narrow path. Then Sir Gawain said, Let us follow that fawn, and see where it goeth. And the others said, We are content. So they followed that narrow path until of a sudden they came to where was a little open lawn, very bright with sunlight. In the midst of the lawn was a fountain of water, and there was no fawn to be seen, but lo! Beside the fountain there lay a wonderfully beautiful lady, clad all in garments of green. And the lady combed her hair with a golden comb, and her hair was like the wing of a raven for blackness. And upon her arm she wore very wonderful bracelets of emeralds and of opal stones, and set into cunningly wrought gold. Moreover, the face of the lady was like ivory for lightness, and the eyes were bright like jewels set in ivory. Now when this lady perceived the knight, she arose and laid aside her golden comb, and bound up the locks of her hair with ribbons of scarlet silk. And thereupon she came unto those knights and gave them greeting. Then those 3 knights gat them down straightway from off their horses. And Sir Gawain said, Lady, I believe that thou art not of mortal sort, but that thou art a fairy. Unto this the lady said, Sir Gawain, thou art right. And Sir Gawain marvelled that she would know his name so well. Then he said to her, Lady, who art thou? And she made answer, My name is Nimue, and I am the chiefest of those ladies of the lake, of whom thou mayst have heard. For it was I who gave unto King Arthur his sword Excalibur. For I am very friendly unto King Arthur, and to all the noble knights of his court. And so it is that I know ye all. And now that thou, Sir Marhaus, shall become one of the most famous knights of the Round Table. And all they three marveled at the lady's words. Then she said, I prithee, tell me what is it that ye seek in these parts? And they say, We seek adventure. Well, said she, I shall bring you on to adventure, but it is Sir Gawain who must undertake it. And Sir Gawain said, That is very glad news. Then the lady said, Take me behind you upon your saddle, Sir Gawain, and I will show unto you that adventure. And Sir Gawain took the lady up behind him upon the saddle. And lo, she brought with her a fragrance such that he had never known before. For that fragrance was so subtle that it seemed to Sir Gawain that the forest gave forth that perfume which the Lady of the Lake brought with her. So the Lady of the Lake brought them in many devious ways out from that part of the forest, and she brought them by sundry roads and paths until they came out into an open country, very fruitful and pleasant to behold. And she brought them up a very high hill, and from the top of that hill they looked down upon a fruitful and level plain, as upon a table spread out before them. And they beheld that in the midst of the plain was a noble castle, built all of red stone and with red bricks. And they beheld there was a small town, built also of red brick. Now, as they sat on their horses there at the top of the hill, they perceived of a sudden a red knight clad all in red armor, who came forth from the glades of the trees. And they saw that the knight appeared in the meadow that lay in the front of the castle, and they saw that he gave challenge to those within the castle. Then they perceived that the drawbridge of the castle would let fall of a sudden, and there was issued from thence 10 knights clad in complete armor. And they beheld those 10 knights assailed the one knight in red armor, and they beheld that the one knight assailed the 10. And they beheld that for a while those 10 withstood the one, but that he assailed them so terribly that he smote down 4 of them very quickly. Then they beheld that the rest brake and fled from before the one, and that the red knight pursued the others about the meadow with great fury. And they saw that he smote them down, one from out his saddle, and another, until but 2 of the knights were left. Then Sir Gawain said, This is certainly a very wonderful sight to see. But the Lady of the Lake only smiled and said, Wait a little. So they waited, and they saw that when the red knight had smitten down all the enemies but those 2, and that when he had put those 2 in great peril of their lives, he of a sudden sheathed his sword and surrendered himself unto thee. And they saw that those 2 knights brought the red knight into the castle. And when they had brought them there, a lady upon the wall thereof bespake of the red knight, as with a great violence of language. And they beheld that those 2 knights took the red knight and bound his hands behind his back, and that they bounded his feet beneath the horse's belly, and that they drave him away from that place. All this they beheld from the top of the hill. And the Lady of the Lake said unto Sir Gawain, There thou shalt find thy adventure, Sir Gawain. And Sir Gawain said, I will go. And the Lady of the Lake said, Do so. Thereupon, lo, she vanished from their sight, and they were greatly amazed.